And what heck? Years.
No, I.
Very good.
Oh, very. And, but yeah, I. Yeah. It's often.
Little tick.
All those lists like that. Yeah, actually. I mean, there's such a shortage.
I apologize, I will.
Okay. Goes yes alone. For noon.
Waiting for his son. Maybe he's on the elevator, I was on, but. Let me off. I'm bypassing it. So finally open. Fire. I said, "Well, what's next?" So you're crazy. I love that. No, I didn't watch this before. And I was the only one on it. So I couldn't even like wait for someone else to get off. Me in the right direction. Yeah. Always. They determine what elevator you get on. You go.
And it doesn't say, I don't stop.
Yeah. Yes. Like 10 minutes was probably like. No, you share it in front of us. My office does not know. It's like.
This, like,
Enzo. That's why.
Nothing you clicking. It's natural. On the Tuesday.
Like a trend. Superintendent. Administrator.
morning, thank you for your patience. I'm just wondering. Also, I will lose additional one.
The grape soda.
Keep changing my seat.
Good morning. I am calling to order the inquiry hearing. Start with introductions because we do have some new folks with us.
My name is Donald Harris. I'm a member of the state board. I'm from.
On Taylor, I'm also a member of the state board.
Here's myself. I'm Erin Bowman, the vice chair of the state board. of Education. My left is Darren Cunningham, AG.
I'm Andrew Feinstein, and I represent the concerned citizens and parents of Kelly Lee Schools.
I'm Michael McKeon. I'm the Director of Legal and Governmental Affairs, State Department of Education.
Morning, my name is Pat Noonan, and I represent the
Okay.
You get your email right.
Executive session.
This stuff.
I'm sure.
So St. Patrick's Day
Yeah.
Okay.
for me and Ian and Noonan.
That's right.
For sure.
Okay.
Hey. Hey. Getting out of executive session and resuming our hearing.
second.
All in favor?
Yes, so, before we begin, we just wanted to talk about the panel member, longtime state. member. It's, apparently because Mr. Clement is expired, so he was these hearings. Want to know if anyone has any objection to Harris, who's your script. Sitting on the panel filling in.
Question for me. No objection. Oh,
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, but no objection.
Any questions about that?
Okay.
he's assured me that he's read the entire transcript. And
It's under 21 pages.
I was going to voir dire him on that, but I didn't.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for
Thank
finding
you.
out.
Newman.
I think that McKeon was. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Thank you. PFDE calls Kathleen Cote. If you need to. Good luck.
Cody. Your name, Cody? Okay. This gentleman right here putting the report in front of you, the report's not. So, he's gonna be transcribing everything we say, so it's really important that everyone up here hear what you say, and it's doubly important. Okay,
Sworn.
for the witness.
You used to swear or affirm.
It's a custom.
Nothing but the truth to help the daughter. First 6 months. I mean,
Clean.
My name is Mike McKeon. I'm the legal director of the State Department of Ed. I appreciate your being here today. A few questions, and after I'm through, Attorney Newton and Attorney Feinstein might have questions as well. Excuse me. Could you please tell us what your current profession is?
My current position is as professional counselor.
Okay, and when did you start in that position?
Full time, started in this position
Yeah, this year, 2024. Okay, and prior to embarking on that career, full time at least, what position did you hold?
as the director of health, student wellness, and
And was that the first position you had held with Killingly Public Schools? What prior position did you hold?
to that.
And that's the equivalent to a director of special education? Okay. How long did you hold that position?
That position. And I was in that position for approximately a year and a half until January.
That's when you assumed your most recent position. And with that, Director of Pupil Services, was that your first position with the Killingly Public Schools? Prior to that, had you worked in any other capacity in Connecticut Public Schools?
Yes, I have.
And could you just give the panel a brief presentation as to the different positions you held?
Absolutely. I began my career at high school counselor intern. In Weston High School, County for years. Back to Southeastern Connecticut, and son, it's a school counselor in the district. In the guidance director, counseling for the district. 2012, left 2018 at Military Academy. I served as NFA for I came to Killing.
And just briefly, could you tell us what your post-secondary education is?
My bachelor's degree. Master's degree in counseling. The educational leadership from Sacred Heart University.
When you were the Director of Pupil Services at Killingly, were you involved in planning and placement team meetings?
I was.
And did any of those planning and placement team meetings result in students being recommended for out-of-district placements? And typically, why would a student be recommended for an out-of-district placement?
There's a variety of reasons, but typically it would be after full team had interventions in place and services in place, first in general education and then special education to try to educate the child and a child continue to struggle for the specialized services like to hi. Thank you. Or was in need of specialized services particular to their disability, then we would make a recommendation to a placement that could serve those needs more appropriately in a generally a more restrictive environment. Mhm. While I was the director, I don't know for sure, but my guess would be for level 3 autism. So for children who were nonverbal, had some self-injurious behavior, would result in a need for an outplacement. Yes, we had students who were outplaced due to an emotional disability as well. So I can say that when I wasn't in my former roles as a school counselor, I wasn't as involved as I was in other districts in the special education process, as I was certainly as a director of pupil services. But I know that our rates of outplacement before I came to Killingly, when I was applying for the job, I did my research and I saw that our rates at that time were higher than the state average. Mhm. For that particular disability, I don't know that I ever disaggregated it. Yes, Director of Mental Health, Student Engagement, and sorry, Director of Mental Health, Student Wellness, and Family Engagement. Um, so we had been at the beginning of the 22-23 school year, I believe. We had learned that we were being awarded the behavioral health pilot grant from the state of Connecticut. And I have always worked in mental health, and having been in the district the amount of time that I've had been, I was aware that there were concerns about from parents and people about mental health supports, and I felt like that is an area where I could help. So I believe it was I'm trying to remember the timing exactly, but I know that there had been we were trying to get a school-based health center in place. And I know that it had not been approved at first. And so as a result of that, those attempts to get the school-based health center in place, many people in the community and working in the school district had spoken at public comment and about the need for mental health supports and services within the school district.
And who is Robert Angeli?
He was the superintendent who hired me.
Hired you,
Well, he was on the committee when I was hired as Director of Pupil Services.
and in your positions there, did you work closely with Mr. Angeli?
Yes,
And were you aware as to whether Mr. Angeli was in favor of a school-based health center?
I was, yes.
And was he in favor of it?
He was actually, because we had both come from districts that had school-based health centers in place. And so he and I had had discussions about how helpful they are for children. And so we had many conversations about it.
And why did you feel there was a need for a school-based health center in Killingly?
Why did I feel there was a need?
Yes.
Because so I'm a proponent of mental health, and I always have been my whole career. So I would always look for ways to increase services for kids. And that to me has been a proven way to increase a particular level of access for children.
Okay. And when you say access to mental health services?
Yes, or physical health. I mean, like the school-based health centers that in Norwich, for example, where I had worked at NFA, we had one at NFA that was comprehensive. So kids could get physicals anytime they were sick. They could go there, could go to the dentist, things like that, and mental health. So my experience had been more very traditional school-based health center, comprehensive, but in Killingly, I know that we were proposing one that was particularly specific to behavioral health and increasing behavioral health supports.
Would it be fair to say, though, at that point, Killingly Public Schools had their own mental health professionals on staff, such as social workers?
Yes, yes.
But was there a concern that they were not sufficient to address the needs of the students?
I think we were looking at different levels of support. School-based clinicians provide supports that are really meant to kind of support the child, to kind of patch them back together and get them back to class. So the goal is obviously very focused on academics still in the school setting. And an outside clinician, like a behavioral health clinician from a school-based health center or from any kind of outpatient behavioral health service, would focus more directly on like kind of getting to a deeper level, less, more time intensive.
There's some information that, well, let me go back a step. Were you aware of a 10-4B complaint that was filed against the Killingly Board of Education?
Yes, I was.
And were you aware, at least in general, of the allegations in there, that being a failure to address student mental
Yes.
health needs? And in the process of investigating that complaint, there was some indication that social workers were the individuals who generally coordinated who worked as case managers or out of district coordinators for special ed kids. Was that your understanding?
No,
That was not your understanding.
no. The way that Killingly uses are the social workers. So the roles in schools are very similar, but they're used. Each district that I've worked in has kind of utilized the role a little bit differently. In Killingly, the social workers provide IEP counseling. So like any children who have counseling as part of their IEP, so children who are in special education, and it doesn't necessarily have to be due to an emotional disability. It could be something like a child was qualified for other health impairment for anxiety or other health impairment for ADHD, and they needed strategies to kind of to support them to handle that through the school day. So any kind of counseling that was built into a an individualized educational plan or a 504 plan was provided by the social workers in the district.
Okay, how about school psychologists? What role do they play?
Yep. Again, the role is different depending on the school district. So I've worked in school districts where the psychologist does predominantly counseling, mental health counseling for IEPs and things like that. And I've worked in districts where the psychologist only does evaluations. In Killingly, our school psychologist only did evaluations.
And at the time, there was only one school psychologist for the whole district. Is that true?
That's true. That was working on for the district. Yes, I did contract out with a psychologist to perform evaluations at the elementary level. But that person was not on Killingly Public Schools staff.
Well, given the fact that there was only one school psychologist, would it be fair to assume if there had been more, that perhaps they could have spent some time providing counseling services?
I think it probably would depend on. They are trained to provide counseling services. Yes, I would say.
During the course of this hearing or the prior investigation and hearing, there's been evidence that school counselors, at least by their job descriptions, were limited primarily to providing academic counseling as opposed to mental health counseling. Was that your experience?
No.
That wasn't your experience in Killingly?
No, it was not. I mean, my experience in Killingly mirrored my experience in my other districts that I've worked in that while it is, there is a good deal of academic counseling that comes with the role, there's always a component of mental health counseling that's provided by school counselors as well. So there's like a developmental guidance program that can be delivered by school counselors that is focused on developmental lessons, whatever age the child is. And so the school counselor role is focused on being preventative. So every child has a school counselor. For example, in a high school, in a traditional high school, every child is assigned to a school counselor. And that is their point person for academic, social, emotional, career counseling based on the comprehensive school counseling guidelines.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Ms. Cody, but when did you start as Director of Pupil Services?
I believe it was July 1st in 2021.
Okay.
Or-
Thank you. Now, in an affidavit that was submitted as part of the investigation response to the 10-4B complaint, Susan Nash, the current superintendent, had stated in her affidavit that during the 2021-2022 school year, school counseling staff have handled at least 660 unplanned or responsive counseling sessions. What's an unplanned counseling session?
So based on if you're following the comprehensive Connecticut, the guidelines for school counseling, there's planned times during the year where you would get your students in, where you would have individual or small group meetings with your kids. Depending on, like at the beginning of the year, it's focused on transition for 9th graders and seniors. 10th grade is focused more on like what you might be interested in for your career, and 11th grade is focused more on future planning. So those meetings are planned, but there's always those responsive pieces where a child might request to see a counselor, and if they're struggling with something, or if they have a question about wherever they are developmentally, about a class, about finding a job, about something going on at home, there's always that piece of it where it's and it's in Killingly, they call it responsive counseling. So because it's a code in attendance. So there could be any number of reasons why a child would go to the school counseling for a responsive counseling session. And in my, that is like precisely why I became a school counselor, because there is so much variety to it in the needs of the kids and in what you're dealing with. You really, because it is very, it's really a tier one kind of thing where everybody in the school, every child in the school has a school counselor. So you really are dealing with pieces of everything. So mental health counseling in a high school, career counseling, family, and across every level, assistance with family and things like that.
There's further evidence that there were so many responsive, unplanned or responsive counseling sessions that the counseling departments had to come up with kind of a triage and take those kids who they deemed to be most in crisis.
Mhm.
Do you recall that?
I recall being told that they had that, yes.
Were you concerned by that?
Concerned by the system that was in place, or concerned that there were a number of kids that needed that?
Well, concerned by the fact that there were so many kids
Mhm.
seeking these unplanned sessions that they did have to come up with this prioritization.
Mhm.
Was that concerning to you?
Yes.
And why was that concerning?
I think it illustrates the level of need and the level of connection that kids are seeking.
In Superintendent Nash, and again, she was not superintendent then when she did the affidavit, but currently is. She said that during the 2021, 2022 through April 26th of the 2021, 2022 school year, there have been 3,581 visits to the school nurse. Does that strike you as a high amount?
I don't know. I don't know if that's higher than, my mom was a school nurse for her career. And so I always know the nurse's office as an extremely busy place, but I don't know if that is, I know that the nurses, the medical center staff in every district I've worked in I've considered them part of my team.
Right.
Of kind of providing, like, they're part of the providers of kind of mental health supports even for children. So,
Well, Ms. Nash went on to state the district anticipated that students would need increased nursing and counseling supports and has encouraged students to use them.
mhm.
So that seems to suggest that students are being told, hey, you have issues, go to the counselor, go to the
Mhm.
nurses. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yes, I think so.
Um,
And I do remember that time in education, as to your point about it being higher. That was the first year after the pandemic where kids were back full time and we weren't in cohorts. So all of the kids were back in the same place. And so after having had this kind of uh, collective experience of the pandemic, so it doesn't surprise me if that is higher, if those nursing visits are like much higher than typical,
um,
and responsive counseling visits as well.
okay, thank you. Were you aware of the CRAC, I'm using the acronym, the CRAC report that took
Yes.
place a
Yes.
couple of years ago?
I was familiar with that report before I came to Killingly, because when I was on the Norwich Prevention Council in my role as a principal at NFA. And prior to that, I had worked in the Limes Youth Service Bureau with CIRAC to implement this survey across other districts. So I was aware of the survey prior to coming to Killingly, and then after it was done, so I was familiar with it.
And once you were at Killingly, you had the opportunity to review it, the report?
Yes, I remember seeing it. I don't remember like the circumstances of seeing it. And I remember, to be honest, I remember it as a talking point at a board meeting. That's really what but I don't remember if I knew about it before that or after.
Well, were you aware of some of the figures that were,
Yes,
and what did you think of those? I'm like with respect to students
Yeah.
who had suicide plans,
yes, I found it alarming.
and was this an alarm, to the best of your recollection, was this an alarm that was shared with other district administrators?
Yes.
And
I mean, I don't recall speaking about it with other people, but and I don't remember if we had conversations about it, but I think any child who, even one, is alarming. So,
well, the SARIC report, which was issued in December 2021, indicated that about 14.7% of the students who responded or participated in the survey reported having seriously considered attempting suicide.
mhm,
Did that strike you as a high number?
it strikes me as high. Like, I mean,
Okay. And 18.2% reported having hurt themselves on purpose. And 28.6% reported that in the past year they had felt sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more.
mhm.
Do you recall that figure?
Not specifically. I remember that that they were all high.
And were you present at board meetings when the CREC report was discussed?
I was present when it came up in context about, or at least virtually present. I don't remember which ones I was actually physically present for or virtually present
Right.
for. But I recall this survey being discussed in the context of trying to get a school-based health center approved.
And to the best of your recollection, did the majority of the board agree with that?
No.
And being in the school community, being an administrator, is it fair to say you would have at least somewhat regular communications with parents?
Mhm.
And do you recall there being any discussion in the community, or even internally among school staff,
Mhm.
about the majority of the board's position with respect to the school-based health center?
Yes.
And let's focus on school staff. In general, what do you recall there being their perspective?
I think the staff was very upset about it.
And why, to the best of your recollection, and I know this calls for some speculation, but based upon what they told you in conversation, what do you base that on, that they were upset?
Well, I would say my leadership style has always been very, like I need to be working very closely with the people that I'm leading. So I had many conversations when I was in pupil services with my faculty and staff in pupil services. And then, and just through that role, I worked with a lot of teachers as well. So I just had conversation. And then obviously when I moved into this role, I was able to focus more clearly on the school mental health workers. So I had many conversations about it.
The 10-4B complaint, essentially, thrust of it, essentially that there was a crisis in the Killingley Public Schools with respect to student mental health needs. Do you think that was a fair characterization?
Yes.
And do you recall there being any discussion, or maybe you heard the board members themselves? And again, I understand it was not all board members who were leaning this way, but rather the majority of the then a board composition, because I know the board composition has changed in the interim. But back then, you recall there being any statement by board members or discussion as to why they were opposed to this?
Yes.
And what was the thrust of that?
My recollection is that the people who were opposed to it were opposed to it because of parental rights, because they were concerned about kids being able to be seen without parental consent.
And that was despite the fact that students had indicated they had suicide plans.
Yes.
So the sure, absolutely.
There were parental rights involved in that, or if they just go directly to that counselor.
Yeah. Students have open access to the people that are hired by the district that work for the district. The school mental health workers, like social workers or counselors, are more readily available, certainly than our school psychologist, because she was testing often. So, but yes, the students would be able to refer themselves to a school counselor or to a school social worker for supports without,
Any parent.
yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. And yeah, that's a great question. Let me follow up on that. So if they wanted to go see one of these responsive visits to the counselor,
Yep.
these unplanned, that would be a situation where they would have to get parent permission first. They could just go talk to the counselor.
They would not need parental permission, right? They would just go to the counseling office.
And the same would be true with a social worker.
Mhm.
They just,
Yeah.
well, yeah, let me ask you that, because you had mentioned that social workers did the counseling for students on IEPs, or
Mhm.
special education students. Would they also be available to typical peers, which are non-special ed students?
Yes. Yes. So that the triage system that was in place at the high school, there was a rotation of social workers and counselors who there was a schedule that they followed. So they would have like shifts. So if a student showed up with a responsive counseling need, whether or not they had an IEP or a 504, it didn't matter. They would see whoever was the clinician, school-based mental health worker who was covering that time period. And that was put in place so that really for scheduling, so that, you know, if there was a planned meeting or something or a PPT that somebody had to be a part of, they wouldn't get pulled out if they couldn't be pulled out. So there was always going to be somebody who was available and not have things scheduled during that time period so that they could be seen by a school mental health worker.
Do you recall there being any discussion as to why they would, we'll strike that. Given that they could go and see the counselors and social workers on their own, why was there a concern, to the best of, and if you don't know, you don't know, that's fine. But do you have an understanding as to why there was a concern about getting parent consent to see someone from a school-based health center?
I don't know.
Okay, that's fair. Now, have you heard of an entity called Generations?
Yes.
And with Generations, the initial school-based health center that was under consideration?
Yes.
And were you involved at all in the discussions with or about Generations?
Initially, like Bob and I talked about it the summer that I was hired.
And Bob is superintendent.
Angela, yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's fine. That's fine.
But I was more like a periphery player in that because I was working in pupil services. So I knew, for example, that Generations was going to do a presentation to the community. I knew that they were in consideration for it.
Okay. And were you aware of Generations? I mean, had you heard anything about them?
Yeah, well, I was aware of them as like a provider of wraparound supports for kids.
Okay. Were there ever occasions, like when a special ed kid, or student required wraparound services,
Mhm.
along those lines that Generations would be, contracted with?
From the school district?
Right.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Um, did you have did you form an opinion based upon what you had heard or seen? Did you form any opinion as to whether Generations was a reputable
Yeah.
operation?
Yes, I was very excited about the prospect of them coming in and providing services for the district. Now, I have worked with other providers in other districts, and I wasn't more excited about Generations than I would have been about any other one, but I was very happy that they were in the area. Like, I was familiar with UCFS in Norwich, but they don't provide those services in Killingly. So to me, Generations was the one that had our catchment area. So I expected that they would have been very good at what they would provide.
Okay. As pupil services director, would you be overseeing or supervising social workers?
Yes.
And did they ever share with you any frustration or stress over the amount of students that they were needing to respond to with respect to these responsive visits?
Yes.
Could you give a little more specifics? I mean, you don't need to
Yes.
actual specific conversations, but I mean, what is the nature of what they would be sharing with you?
So at that point, that was I think it was my first year as director of pupil services, and there were 2 social workers at the high school, and they had a larger amount the school counselors. And so they were ending up having to, there was a concern that it was about equity and making sure that the responsive counseling shifts were all covered, but like in an equitable fashion.
Okay.
So, because there were more school counselors than there were school social workers, and the school social workers have the legal responsibility to do their IEP counseling. So I had requested that we look at that and make it equitable.
Okay. And with that, I'm sorry.
When you're talking about equitable, is it
Yeah.
equitable for the students or equitable among the employees?
Among the employees. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So like, for example, if there were 2 social workers, this is an example because I don't remember the exact amount of time, but like one would have one day, another would have another day, and then the other 3 days would be split among like 6 school counselors. So it was like that may be more than it had been, but that maybe it was like half a day, but it was not equitable as far as the amount of time that the adults were spending in there.
Is it fair to assume that this whole issue came up because there was such an influx of students seeking these unplanned visits? The fact that they were having to work these shifts?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just because I've in my experience and in Killingly it was no different. Working with kids is working with kids.
Right.
And so everybody is willing to do that. I think the issue was in in that regard, it was just a matter of equity for time, because the social workers, like I said, had that the legal responsibility to fit in all of their kids' sessions based on the IEP requirements. But this is the way that Killingly handled it, like the way that Killingly had decided to do the responsive counseling. Like in other places that I've worked, it just is less organized, like, so every place would have responsive kind of time. But like if one of my kiddos came to see me and I was with another student, then they would maybe see a social worker or a counselor or something like that. So it was just more in Killingly, I feel like it was just more defined. And also because I said the time of it, just kind of in the world, there was an increase.
Right.
We also were short. We had difficulty hiring social workers because it's a shortage area. So at different points, there was only one social worker at the high school, and that social worker had the responsibility to do the IEP counseling for all of the students in the high school.
Okay.
Question as well.
Sure.
So you made reference to the triage, and the social workers had an equity issue concerning, and maybe the guidance counselors did too. Was the issue equity issue enough that the social workers were not fulfilling their responsibility of IEPs and 504? Was that also a concern? That what their job is to, to counsel for IEPs and 504s, that was taking a second seat to this triage that was created?
So I think that it wasn't it hadn't become an issue, but I was anticipating that it could become an issue if there was too much. I hate to like even make because when there's kids that need help, they're all willing to do it, but it's and let me say this too, the social workers didn't come to me and say, hey, this isn't fair. It's something that I looked at and said, this could be a problem because of the legal ramifications of the IEP.
Of the IEP.
Yeah, so, but I did not to my knowledge, all of the IEP hours were being met.
And when this triage, just to clarify for myself, when this triage was put in place, you were the director of health at that point?
No, I was.
You were pupil personnel.
Pupil personnel. And I don't know if that predated me. Like, I'm not sure if that happened the same year that I started or if it happened before that. I think it was the same year.
So when you went up to the director of health, was there a new pupil personnel person?
Yes.
That person took over managing this triage?
Well, not really, because my position, was I ended up taking all of the mental health workers.
Okay, so you were in charge still of the triage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I wasn't responsible for the social workers, like making sure they're meeting their IEP hours and things like that, that were very specific to pupil services per se, but it was just part of the whole school mental health.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Blue, Ferris.
Would just like to ask a clarifying question, because now you started as Director of Pupil Services in July of 21. The CERAC report came out in February or March of 21. I'm just concerned about two statements I heard you make. One regarding the CERAC report, that you became aware, and secondly, the Generations proposal, that you were on the periphery. And I'm just wondering, in your position as Director of Pupil Services, should you have been a major player? Is that a fair question?
In the CRAC survey? I feel like the CRAC survey was in the fall. Like after like that fall of when I started. And that was like around when, and then like January is when maybe the generations presentation was.
Could we get a clarification when that survey was?
Yes, the CRAC final report was issued in December of 2021.
Okay, so the survey was done in like November of 21. And so I had started like a few months before in July. So,
But you said you became aware.
yeah.
Did you have a copy of the report? I mean, you, the director.
No, it's funny you say that because I don't remember how I was, like, I know that I was aware of the survey in other capacities in other districts because I was on the prevention council. And at that time, I wasn't on the Killingly Prevention Council because it's a survey that is kind of run through prevention councils that work in conjunction with the school district. And then CRAC, which is kind of the overseeing agency for our catchment area for the for prevention councils, administers the survey, and then CRAC kind of generates the report and shares that with the schools who have participated. So I'm very, like, I remember being aware of the survey, but in my memory, I feel like it had been as part of the prevention council, not necessarily in my role as a school administrator, if that makes sense. And then in Killingly, I don't remember actually seeing the actual report until it became part of the discussion around the school-based health center. And I do think if I had been, I think because I was newer in working in pupil services, I hadn't been in pupil services prior to this. I had gone from being a high school principal to being a director of pupil services. There's a big learning curve. And so had it been like in my second year, I probably would have been more involved in it, but I think, or I may have been, but in my role in pupil services, I was really focused on learning pupil services and, you know, in that, just learning all the intricacies of that role.
But continuing with generations, you said you were on the periphery. And that
Mhm.
was after you were hired.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, again, I see you as having a seat at the table, not at the small table in the back. So who's making the decisions?
About generations, you mean,
Yeah,
being brought forward?
yeah.
I feel like that discussion started like the year prior to me starting in the district. I think Bob Angeli had, I'm not sure how I would have done it, I would have identified which provider in our catchment area does what UCFS or Child and Family does, based on my prior experience. And I know that Generations had a school-based health center in Putnam because the middle school principal in Putnam had been the director of pupil services at NFA. So I knew her professionally. So I was aware of Generations as a provider in that regard. And I am familiar also with all the different social service agencies having different catchment areas, providing similar services based on where they're located.
Yeah.
But I'm just gonna follow up for a minute. But in Killingly, when you were hired, was that part of your interview per se, that they were looking at generations, or they didn't mention the survey? You were earlier said that you were happy or thrilled that generations was going to come in, that you felt it was very much needed. But you hadn't seen the survey, you just heard about it. Did you
At
ever
that point-
physically, was that ever shared with you, the survey?
I don't remember if it was, I don't think we ever, I know that we didn't ever um, like, I don't remember having like a conversation or a meeting specifically about this survey.
So it's basic, if, as far as you know, the only one that had I'm assuming Superintendent Angeli
Mhm.
had seen the survey as, and then the board would be the only other party that was privy to this survey?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know what the distribution, circuit is. I don't know.
All right,
I'm
thank
not
you.
sure of that. And I just to be clear, I didn't have any, Generations to me was just another service provider. Like I didn't question, like, why is it Generations and not this, right? Like, I didn't have any idea about that there were other agencies that would be able to provide the same service, because in my experience, it had been very specific agencies that had done it based on the area I was in. So I just thought, oh, there's just the one that does it up here is Generations. So when I moved into the role of director of mental health, one of my first responsibilities was investigating other options and bringing them to the Board of Ed. So it was at that point that I recognized, oh, there's a lot more other, well, not a lot more, but there are other options.
And that responsibility came into your bucket of work because the board had not voted for Generations.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I believe so. Timeline wise, yes.
Okay.
So Bob and I had a conversation. I felt like I could maybe be utilized more effectively if I could focus on mental health, because that's really my wheelhouse. So, and that coupled with the infusion of behavioral health pilot grant money, that we could write the grant to support my salary. Bob, we worked on a job description, and Bob approached the board, and that's how my position came to be.
Thank you.
Speaking of Superintendent Angeli, or former Superintendent Angeli, in reviewing minutes of various board meetings, it seems that he was fairly constant in advocating for a school-based health center. Is that accurate?
Yes, very much so.
And it's fair also to say that he was a great booster of interventions to address students' emotional and mental health needs.
Yes.
And do you recall the State Department of Education back in October 2022 issuing a report with respect to the 10-4B complaint?
Yes.
And is that something that was discussed internally when you were at Killingly Public Schools as an administrator?
I would say pretty minimally.
And
I mean, I think it was discussed quite a bit, probably in many different circles, but administratively, I don't, I think we just, I don't remember having specific things where we took that out and kind of talked about it.
But did Superintendent Angeli, did that, to the best of your knowledge, was he in disagreement with its stated or its findings with respect to the need for additional mental health interventions?
Are you asking if I think that Bob disagreed that if I think that Bob.
It was a poorly asked question. I'm sorry. In fact, so poorly, I withdraw it. But you indicated that during your time there when Mr. Angeli was still superintendent, he was consistently in favor of
Mhm.
bringing in more help for the students.
Yes,
And isn't it true that Mr. Angeli was then non-renewed by the Board of Education?
yes.
Um, so, now I've asked you a lot of questions, with respect to your initial incarnation at, in the Killingly Public Schools. So you just testified in response to panel members' questions that, you spoke with Superintendent Angeli about creating and then filling the role that you were Director of Mental Health. And this was so it sounds as if this was an initiative that was first raised by you and agreed to by the superintendent.
Yes,
Ms.
So,
Cody, can you answer it instead of not?
yes.
Thank you.
yes. The, so what was your understanding? What was your charge? I mean, what was, okay, you're
Mhm.
taking this position. And actually, let me go back a step and ask you another question. You've testified that you're a mental health professional,
Mhm.
and you told us about your background, and you're now in private practice providing such services. From that perspective, from your background and experience, is it fair to say that you felt that these mental health services were necessary?
Yes,
Okay. To the point where, again, you suggested we're getting this grant,
Mhm.
and this would be a perfect opportunity to create this position.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And so, okay, let me get back into the question I just asked. What, in your mind, what was your charge? What was your role going to be?
My first and foremost, it was to look for alternatives to school-based health center. So kind of think outside the box a little bit about how we could meet the needs. And that included looking at other alternatives and bringing them to the Board of Ed. For that, there was an ad hoc committee for mental health. So bringing them to the ad hoc committee for mental health.
And I believe that ad hoc committee was not formed until after the state issued its October 2022 report.
I think that's true.
Okay. And when you say thinking outside of the box, looking for alternatives, are you talking about other providers of school-based health centers or some other type of approach?
So regarding the school-based health center, for me, I kind of looked at it as outside of the box, like looking at the systems that we had in place and making sure that the systems themselves were designed in a way to effectively meet the needs of the kids. So kind of looking at our delivery system and seeing if we make a change over here, will that kind of impact positively more kids? Like changing caseloads, different things like that.
And this would be something that you would, I presume would be, no, I shouldn't assume anything, but was it necessary to, okay, actually, let me go back a step and ask you another question. When you were Director of Pupil Personnel Services, again, you had supervisory authority over the mental health professionals, such as social workers. Did that supervisory authority shift when you took over to you as the Director of Mental Health?
Yes.
Okay. And so let's say I'm a social worker. I'm at Killingly High School. Do I report to the building principal or do I report to you when you're in that role?
Yeah. So it was kind of shared.
Okay. And in your role, did you have communications with building principals?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of having such conversations?
Well, many purposes. So advocating for certain things to support the kids and student mental health workers. You know, if there were a lot of it was advocacy for the school mental health workers and for their ability to determine needs.
That's interesting. Why would you have to advocate for the student mental health workers? Was there resistance from the building principals?
I think that I've always, I would say my background is very focused on mental health overall. Like I've always seen that you have to deal with the mental health before you can get to like academics. And I think that that's because of my unique background, you know, having come in as a school counselor, and I was an administrator of a very particular student population, kids who are at very high risk of dropping out.
That's like the alternative high school at Norwich Free Academy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I had a very different background. So, and I think just there's always kind of that figuring out what areas of focus are going to be, whether it's academics, mental health, things like that. So I feel like in my role, I've always advocated, you know, even, and that's true even when I was at NFA, there's five buildings at NFA. And so I would advocate for kids on main campus for mental health to be, but in traditional schools, it's much, yeah, I think sometimes we had different priorities.
We had different priorities, meaning you and the building principals.
Yes.
Um,
Or different ideas about how to get the priorities met.
well, you know, of course, I'm going to ask you to expand upon that. So let me ask you a few questions. Would it be fair to say that in order for you to be effective in implementing the goal or pursuing the goals of your position, you would need buy-in from building principals?
Yes.
And were there differences in levels of buy-in among the schools?
Yes.
And I know these questions are difficult to ask. I know they can put you in an uncomfortable position, and I apologize for that. And let me just reiterate, we're not here to vilify or to prosecute or anything like that. This is an inquiry, just so we understand what's going on. So were there any schools in particular in which there was buy-in? Well, let me ask you a different way. If you were to talk about the different levels of buy-ins across the spectrum, which school would you say had the most buy-in? It's kind of alarming that you need to give that much thought to it.
Well, I just mean, it depends on, I mean, there were some things that worked very well at some schools and didn't work at other schools. You know, I think, I guess I would probably say KISS. I had buy-in all along from KISS is the intermediate school, sorry, killing the intermediate school. I feel like across all of the schools, the school mental health workers, the teams are really good.
Right.
And really solid professionals.
And let me just hasten to say, even in the State Department's report, there was never a question as to the dedication and the abilities of the actual on the ground mental health professionals. So we don't doubt that. But as you indicated, supervisory authority was shared between you and the building principal or building administrators. So with respect to buy-in from the building administrator level, Was there an equal amount of buy-in across the district?
No.
Was there any, if you had to be asked, and I am asking you, so it's kind of a ridiculous rhetorical approach, but which school did you have the most difficulty with as far as buy-in?
The high school.
And could you give some explanation as to when you say that they were the most difficult with respect to buying in, how did that manifest itself?
I think that it came down to probably who has the ultimate authority to make changes. And it wasn't me.
Okay, well, you're a central office administrator, correct?
Yes,
And so the central office administrator, your administrative responsibilities and powers were not limited to a school, but rather across the district. Isn't that fair to say?
yes.
And so let's stick to the high school. It sounds as you're saying, and I don't, obviously if I'm incorrectly characterizing what you just stated, please tell me. Don't agree with me, disagree with me. But it sounds as if you're saying that there was something of a turf war, to use inelegant terms, between you and building administration at the high school. Would that
Yeah.
be, would
Yeah.
that, go ahead, Nancy, I'm sorry.
I think that's accurate. I think it was like a matter of just differing opinions sometimes on both. Everyone focused on their own perception of what was right for kids. So I think that I wouldn't want to convey that people were not operating under anything other than what they thought was best for kids. But it just sometimes it differed, I think, in my my style, my experience, and so it was challenging.
Did you have, and I know different districts have different titles for these types of meetings, but have you ever heard of something called a student assistance team?
Yes.
And is that the terminology that was used in Killingly?
No.
What was the name of the?
Well, each school has like their own kind of, actually at the high school, it's called the SSP, but it's not the school counseling SSP.
Is that like student support plan? No, what
I
is it?
think so. I think student,
That's fine, whatever.
I don't know.
I don't want you to guess.
Yeah.
Those acronyms.
But SSP in a school counselor's mind is like a student success plan, which is the initiative from the state that every child starting in 6th grade will have a student success plan that gives them a plan for 6th through 12th grade, including post-secondary, what they're going to do. So it's not that kind of SSP.
Right.
It stands for it's a student success.
Well, is it the equivalent of a student assistance team?
Yes.
And could you explain to the panel what a student assistance team is?
Yes. So student assistance team generally are teams that from the school that generally consists of school mental health workers and administration, sometimes a teacher in other districts, all focused on identifying children who need increased supports and ensuring that those supports are put into place. Like, so monitoring, identifying, monitoring, and kind of like an action plan for how to support the students. So it's like an opportunity to kind of team and collaborate on the different aspects of a child. The school counselor would generally bring, you know, kind of academically where the student's at. The administrator knows about like discipline, things like that.
And was that a vehicle that was implemented like at the high school?
Yes, it's in place at the high school.
And was that a process that was encouraged at the high school?
I think so.
Was it implemented and encouraged? That's kind of a compound question, but was it implemented at the other schools in the district?
Yes, I think like each school has a crisis team. So these teams are kind of very similar in that or they'd have like an attendance review team. So they're all called different things, but they're kind of doing the same work. So like in the elementary schools, for example, there's team meetings with the people who also happen to be on the crisis team every week. For example, these team meetings are focused on kids that need support. And part of that team is the special education teachers and the school social workers or counselors and administration. So yes, so I hope I answered that.
Well, did you find there to be any variations among buildings as to whether these were vehicles that were encouraged? Their use was encouraged?
I think they were part of every building.
Okay, that's fair. I think you testified before, and I just want to circle back to that. And again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please disagree with me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but you believe that there is an entwinement between student mental health and academic success?
Yes, absolutely.
So a failure to address mental health needs could have an adverse effect on the student's ability to progress academically?
Yes.
Was that a philosophy that you felt was shared by all the building administrators?
I think so.
Well, I guess, you know, I asked because I'm curious. I'm going to come back to this, circling back to this. You said at the high school, with respect to buy-in, there seemed to be a lesser level of buy-in there than there were at some of the other schools. That's fair to say?
Yes.
Did you feel that your efforts were being impeded at the high school?
Yes.
And I know you said before, it's like, well, who's in charge here? But was it something beyond that when you say that you felt your efforts are being impeded?
Beyond kind of like who has the ability to make the decisions, you mean?
Well, you say that you're the director of mental health. You've testified that you're a mental health professional. You've testified that you have an orientation and a perspective that's rooted in your mental health experience and professional background. So when you say, so your charge as director of mental health was to address what you perceive to be, is it fair to say that in your role as director of mental health, your job, your role was to address or to enhance, let's say, the student mental health needs, the responses to student mental health needs. Is that fair?
Yes.
So was it that mission, that responsibility that was being impeded.
Yes. I mean, personally, I think I decided that potentially I needed to focus on developing systems that could be in place without me. And then kind of lay a foundation for the next person who would be coming in to the role, because I personally had many challenges, and I began to feel that I pivoted and started focusing more on the day-to-day supports of the counselors and social workers. And trying to recognize that I may be able to have a wider impact in a different role for mental health, and maybe not in Killingly.
So is it fair to say then that ultimately you chose to leave Killingly, at least in part because you felt frustrated in the role you're trying to serve in Killingly?
Yes, that was part of it.
I can tell this is very emotional for you. Would you like to take a break, or are you fine? Keep
I'm
going.
fine. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a lot of affection for a lot of people on doing really excellent work in Killingly. And so, and I ultimately didn't want to get in the way of things that I believe needed to move forward. And so I hoped that through conversations that maybe the work would be able to be accomplished after I left.
I have a question.
Sure.
I just would like to ask
Absolutely.
here, because I assume as the central office administrator, you had a team that you work with, a central office administrative team. These pivots that you refer to and that the things you wanted to put in place, were these shared with the other individuals in your administrative team?
Yes. And I think towards the end of my tenure, they started to happen. And I think that things improved as far as started to improve as far as things moving forward, different trainings and things.
Thank you.
Well, you indicated that you were having some of your work you felt was being impeded at the building level. That's fair to say.
Yes.
Did you have central office support when confronted with those barriers?
I think that people were supportive of me personally. And so like, for example, while I was there, I had different meetings with administration and human resources to try to clarify certain points. So I felt like there were attempts to support me.
What would you say to clarify certain points? What exactly are you referencing?
So I think what I would say is that the Board of Education, when I started in the district, behaved in a certain way that I found appalling, personally. Even though I've had respect and support from that board and the current board. So while it wasn't ever directed at me, I was a witness to it. And the faculty and staff were witnesses to it too. And I think that bleeds down. I think leadership is the most important role. Like roles in a school, that's our most important job. And in my experience, I felt like what was kind of set at the top bled down. And it became untenable for me. Even as people changed, it just became something I didn't want to participate in anymore.
As you say, Superintendent Angeli had been non-renewed
Right.
by the board. So to clarify and we're not talking about you personally here, but rather professionally, with respect that behavior you found appalling. That was also influencing, you felt, some of the administration.
Yeah, I just think it was difficult sometimes to have conversations, just necessary conversations to collaborate. And like that board at the time felt so contentious and not safe. And I think that's how it felt at times as an administrator.
Okay.
Like, just that, just that that was difficult.
Right.
I have just a quick question. I don't mean to keep interrupting, but I know this is so difficult for you, but when you talked about the board and your lack of collaboration that you referred to with administration, is that because of this? Do you feel it was because of the 10-4B and that prevented that collaboration to be present? Because the board was wrapped up in this and thus the administration was, and you were part of that administrative team?
I don't think so, because I feel like administratively we were kept pretty separate from the 10-4B. Like it was like in the day-to-day. I think it was it's been incredibly stressful for a couple of us in the district, you know, like kind of the ongoing
But you were
headspace
kept,
it takes.
you were kept separate from it?
No, I just mean like, it wasn't something that like administratively, like that we would have, like when we got the whole across the district administrators together, it wasn't something that we discussed, the 10-4B. Like it was, the building principals were much more focused on just getting the day-to-day, you know, work of the building.
What about your
Done.
administrative team? Not all the principals and
Administrative at
assistants?
central office?
Yeah,
No, I mean,
that was not something you,
not really. We
Okay.
would have like just kind of like if there was an update or something, like we meet every Monday, and if there was an update, something had transpired, then we would just get a quick update. But it wasn't like, you know,
so it was on the board's plate. It wasn't on your necessarily on the administrative team.
well, it was on
Well, it was there.
it was on, actually, there was a lot of work that we had to do to focus on sending information to our prior council. A lot.
Okay.
So that, I think, that contributed to, I think, from in my position, because I mean, it's about mental health supports in the district, and I'm the director of mental health. I think it was personally, I've always across my career had really excellent relationships with families. And the way that this played out felt,
It hurt that collaboration. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, like it made it difficult, which was really foreign to me. And I felt like I was on trial sometimes, like for what I was doing or should have been doing, and that was very uncomfortable for me.
Thank you.
And quite honestly, that did get in the way. Like that took a lot of headspace to keep fighting the good fight, you know? But having said that, there's many families in Killingly who have excellent, I don't have like any contentious relationships with families. It was just the overall kind of like I said, I think it started at the top. It felt like watching it was felt unsafe. And I think that just like kind of, that's what happens. That's what happens, you know, like that it impacts the adults so profoundly that. But I agreed that we needed a school-based health center, you know, so I agreed with all of that. So that kind of coupled with the affection I had for and have for people that I didn't agree with, you know, on the board, and was a challenge.
And was that a challenge you felt up through this February of this year when you left Killingly?
Yes.
And
But like I said, I think I was probably, I know I was definitely more involved in everything that is being kind of scrutinized appropriately than anybody else in the district. So it would naturally have more of an impact on me.
But it would have a positive impact on you if things were, if there was this vision, this mission that you were responsible for.
Yes,
I would guess it would be a positive impact if it were embraced across the district. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
yes.
So then it's fair to say it was not embraced across the district. Okay, that's fair. Your mission, your professional charge as
Mhm.
Director of Mental Health, is it then fair to say that that was not embraced district-wide?
So my perception is my perception, right? Like I think that I don't think anybody else is anybody working, uh, any of the administrators would think that they don't believe in that charge, that mental health is at the forefront. I think that's like a basic belief system. But in my perception, there's words and actions, right? So it's like, it's important that they match.
To walk the walk as well as talk the talk. That's fair to say.
Yes, and I don't know if it's like kind of like a tornado of all of it that is what caused it to be the way it is or the way it was for me. Like I'm not sure what pieces contributed to it. I just lived it.
You made reference before to the behavioral health pilot,
Yes.
and could you explain what that is?
Yeah, the behavioral health pilot was is a grant, that pilot program that started last let me year, the 2022-2023 school year. And there is it's a school mental health quality assessment that is a way to assess the comprehensiveness of your mental health program that you have in a school district. That's through the SHAPE system. And we were awarded this grant, and as such, worked closely with the state and with CHDI, the Child Health Development Institute. We had two wonderful support people from CHDI who worked with our district team to conduct the assessment and to then go over the assessment results and create an implementation plan for using the results of the assessment, create an implementation plan for how to either supplement, where the gaps are, identify where the gaps are, and identify what your priority areas are going to be. So we met at the beginning of this school year with the CHDI team and developed an implementation plan for the behavioral health pilot.
I'm going to show you a document, see if you recognize it.
Thank you.
Well, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
And could you describe it? What is it?
Yes. This is the implementation plan that CHDI wrote after meeting with our district team.
Okay,
So we have a district team. It's on the second.
right, the second page.
Yeah,
And are those the two individuals there, Rebecca Behan and Rosie
yes,
Brendel? They are the individuals from CHDI that you worked with?
yes,
All right, this is a document that I believe I previously provided by email to Attorney Noonan and Attorney Feinstein. I'd like to introduce it as an exhibit. Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you.
I would like to, for instruction, I'd like to see what constitutes the date at which it came out.
Sure.
the date,
Yeah, before or after you left,
before,
like when?
in the fall. So the first stage of it was CHDI had to have a contract with the CSDE in order to provide us with technical assistance for the grant. So that contract, I believe, was finalized this past summer. So Rosie and Rebecca and I met at the very end of August to prepare for our first meeting with, and they already knew our results because we had done the school mental health quality assessment the year prior. So first I met with them at the end of August, and then we met with them again for our first full team meeting in, I think it was early October. And then we met every month on like the second Tuesday of the month or something.
Yeah, my only question was, when was this document finalized?
Probably the second Tuesday in November would be my guess.
Thank
Or third Tuesday. It was November. Yes.
My objection.
What number we're up to?
Part, I think, like I said, I think it's number 3.
Number 3.
Thank you.
Exhibit 3 is entered.
Thank you. Just have a couple of questions about this, Ms. Cody. On top of the first page, there's a bit of a chart, desire for refinement, resources to achieve refinement, and barriers to refinement. You see that?
Yes.
And under desire for refinement, well, let me ask you, when it says refinement, what exactly does that mean?
So I take that to, based on the meeting that we had, I believe that is refinement of like the comprehensive nature of our school mental health program across the district.
Okay. So the desire, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the greatest desire, was rated to 10, correct?
Yes.
Now, in the next line is resources to achieve refinement, again, using a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being no resources, 10 being many resources, the number is 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to come back to that. And then the next part of the chart is barriers to refinement. Again, 1 to 10, 1 being no barriers, 10 many barriers, and that's an 8. That's also correct?
Yes.
So resources. So the district, and this was, as you indicated, to the best of your recollection, this document was finalized in the second week in November of 2023. And at that point, the resources was 1 being no resources with a 3. Could you expand upon that?
Yes. So my memory of that is because we had so much turnover of staff, including in special ed. I mean, not special ed, sorry, school mental health workers. So, and we had positions that were difficult to fill. So for example, at the high school alone, we had a lead counselor who had just started that the same day that I started in my role, the lead counselor started in his role at the high school. And then by September of that year, of the following, like 23-24 school year, there were 3 new counselors, and there were only 2 counselors out of the entire high school counseling staff who had been there longer than me, longer than I had been there. So there was a huge turnover in the time that I was working there.
And I mean, there's different stories for everyone. But did you have any understanding or perspective as to why there was such turnover among the school mental health
I have to
professionals?
object to that one. I don't know how she can testify as to why people left. It seems to me that's
Okay,
something,
that's fair.
it seems to me that's something that those people would know more than Ms. Cody.
Okay, that's fair. Let me withdraw that and ask it a different way. Ms. Cody, you talked about there being such a turnover. Did you have any conversations with any of these individuals before they left?
Yes.
And during the course of the conversations, did any of them share with you the reasons why they were leaving?
Yes.
And for any of these reasons, I mean, some of the reasons, okay, I'm not going to assume anything, but did any of them relate to the status of mental health services within Killingly Public Schools?
I think through the conversations that I had, they were due to similar frustrations that I was experiencing.
Okay, thank you. Now, barriers to refinement. Again, 1 being no barriers, 10 being many barriers. That was rated an 8. Could you expand upon that?
I think that's the question she had just answered.
Well, no, she was actually referring to resources to achieve
Sorry.
time being only 3. So the barriers to refinement was rated an 8, which is again too shy of many barriers. Could you expand upon that?
Yeah, so part of it is I think part of it is due to how the uptick in kids who really needed more consistent support, coupled with lower staffing levels, so higher levels of kind of constant, like, so my role, for example, although it was inherently administrative, I was providing a lot of direct support to kids and to faculty and staff. So, through counseling, quite honestly. So,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but you as the mental health director were providing counseling directly to students? Is that what you just said?
I ran a couple groups. Yeah. So I was running a group at the high school this year. And I ran some groups in a group for 4th graders.
And this was due to the decreasing in staffing.
Yeah, it was like all a combination, like it's hard to tease out kind of. It was just like more of like when you're there, I could see that there's need. So it's like, how can I, that's what I was talking about when I was saying, like, what can we look at systemically, kind of outside of the box, and see how we can meet the needs of kids maybe a little differently. So like by trying to make sure that the counselors were in the classroom as often as possible, right? So like, but that is a change from how they had been able to provide services. So I would step in certain instances so that they could then be, because they're the ones that the kids know. So like I could trouble, kind of like just sit in the counseling office and just help kids as they came in, because I had been a guidance director too. So I could do like things like that if I needed to. But it was really more focused on mental health needs. The academic stuff the school counselors were still providing. So yeah, so looking at systems, like how do we know who really needs us? How do we know, how are we tracking that? What data are we using to ensure that we know who's struggling, who needs more support, things like that. So I was kind of like behind the scenes looking at just with like an overview district wide of like, where can we get kind of the biggest bang for the buck?
Thank you. On the first page, at the bottom of the first page of this document, which is the marked state, Exhibit 3, and under barriers, it says, what would prevent us from moving forward with this goal? And there are 4 bullets listed there, bullet points. The second one is lack of sound SEL at secondary level. Just for the record, could you tell us what SEL is?
Social emotional learning.
And what is that?
So at the other schools, they utilize programs, like specific programs that develop SEL and deliver SEL lessons, social emotional learning, lessons related to social emotional learning. So second step, pyramid is used at Goodyear, which is the pre-K. They follow the pyramid model. Second step is at KCS, which is for kindergarten and first graders. And then 2 through 4 uses ruler, and the middle school uses ruler as well. The high school was just starting to go through the training process of using ruler. So they were catching up, but there wasn't anything that was necessarily in place yet. Now, and that I have to say is not uncommon for high schools to not have like it's less defined in high schools than it is like the programs that you do for in elementary school are generally done by like the general ed teachers. And in the high school, it's a little bit more oftentimes done through the health curriculum or through the school counselors going in for developmental guidance, more so sometimes through an advisory program also.
So now I know I keep referencing it, but the State Department of Education's report on the 10-4B complaint came out in October 2022. So over a year later, November 2023, there still was not sound SEL at the secondary level.
So the training for ruler had happened. There's like a multi-year training program. So I think the first year of that potentially is when the administrators were trained. And then the following year, the teachers were trained in it. And I believe next year they're going to be delivering it at the high school. But I think that has happened since I left. Sorry. I think the the developmental guidance and the ruler curriculum is, I believe it's going to be part of the schedule at the high school next year, but that was done after I left, the decision for that, because they've been meeting in committees for scheduling. The other thing though is that earlier in the year, I was working with Aperture from the state, had a partnership with Aperture this year to deliver the DESA to students, which is a screener for social emotional skills. Takes like less than a minute for the mini, and teachers complete the screening, and you can identify from that screening level kids who may need more support in certain areas related to mental health and wellness, social emotional learning. I would say wellness and social emotional learning. That first screening was done like across the district before I left. So that's another initiative, kind of just of like, how can we be sure that we know who needs support? And how do we identify what supports are most appropriate for them?
And I think you answered a question I was going to ask. On the top of the second page, there's proactive screening pre-referral process. Is that what
Yeah.
you're referencing?
Yes.
Okay. Back to the bottom of the first page. Again, under barriers, the last bullet point, the staffing, turnover, staff burnout due to crisis management.
Mhm.
Staff burnout due to crisis management. Could you expand upon that?
Yes. So I think there's a couple of things at play there, in that after the pandemic, when kids all came back, there was huge increase, I think probably across the world, of kids coming back dysregulated and having trouble with emotional regulation. And I think so I think that contributed to just the heightened level of stress. But we also had, in the time that I was there, we had 2 students pass away. And we had a 6th grader pass away in January, right when we were coming back, our first day back from Christmas break. My first day as in my new role, that was a student in the intermediate school. And then the following year, or the following May, a student at the high school passed away. Yep, the following May, a student from the high school passed away. So there were true crises that happened, that the staff was dealing with, and our whole community was dealing with.
At least a high school student you just referenced, that was a suicide, correct?
I believe that it was ruled that, yes.
Okay. So we're in the second week of November of 2023. You've been part of this assessment, this school mental health quality assessment, which results in this implementation plan, correct?
Yes.
And at that point, and again, let me ask you, and I know you told me, again, I told you my short-term memory, when did you assume your position as Director of Mental Health?
January of 2023.
Okay, so 11 months after that, the barriers to refinement are still at an 8 out of 10.
Yes.
Is that something you found frustrating?
Yes.
And then a couple of months after that, you chose to resign, correct?
Yes.
Um, at some point, you testified that part of your responsibilities were trying to look into alternatives to generations.
Yes.
And ultimately, the district entered into an agreement with Community Health Resources, Inc., or CHR. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And were you involved in that process?
Yes, very.
And do you recall when they came online, so to speak? In other words, when they started
Yes.
working with the district?
I do.
Okay, and when was that?
With the first day they saw students or the first day that we like formed the partnership?
Well, the first day where they started working with you as the administration as to, okay, this is what it's going to look like. This is what this is how we're going to
Yeah.
ramp it up.
So I would say that came about. So I started in January. I feel like we had a couple different presentations from a couple different agencies. The board voted to go with CHR in the spring of 23. And I believe they were through licensing, or they got approval to start their licensing process in June of 23. So actually, as of May, we already knew that they were going to be in the high school the following year.
And were they in fact operating within the Killenly Public Schools during the 2023-24, the current school year?
Yes. So there were intakes. Some intakes happened over the summer in Willimantic, in the Willimantic office, but we didn't start actually seeing, the CHR clinicians didn't start seeing students in the school district until the first Monday of school, which was September 11th, 2023.
And how often were they in the schools? In other words,
Mhm.
let's say
Yep.
on a weekly basis.
So it started off with one day in the high school and one day in the middle school for the same clinician. And then I believe that was September. And then October, I feel like mid-October, we added a second clinician to the middle school because we had many more completed referrals from the middle school.
And prior to the start of the 2023-2024 school year, was there any groundwork laid as
Yes.
to how this students are going to be referred and so forth?
Yes. So I had met with Mike Asinas, he has a different title now, but at the time he and Kathy Schleisel were the ones who were working with us in the early stages. And then when they came for a tour of the spaces, I met Diane Reese, who is the clinical coordinator for CHR, and met with them about how to most effectively get students enrolled. And I also spoke with had email communication with school counselor or school social worker in Thompson schools because CHR also they were already doing a co-location model in Thompson schools. So I reached out to that person to say, hey, how did you get started? Like, any pitfalls, like anything that you would recommend? And so from that information, supplementing what I had talked with Mike and Diane about, that's how we came up with our internal process for referrals, which we started in the schools in June.
And in fact, part of that during the summer, there was outreach to certain families, correct?
Yes.
And was there a particular characteristic that guided the family to whom you reached out?
So as a school counselor, I would say, like, I always was kind of aware of all the kids on my caseload, and if any had, I was aware that they were looking to get connected with somebody for outpatient behavioral health, or, so that is like the first, like, the mental health professionals already had awareness of families that they were working for, that they had perhaps made a recommendation or like a suggestion that maybe the child would benefit from outpatient behavioral health. So there were those students. And then we were doing at the same time implementing the LEAP program for attendance, which is started really as like an attendance thing with home visits. But during those home visits, so those are kids that are identified as having attendance concerns. And so our attendance coordinator reached out to families and said, if you would like to have a home visit, we can schedule it this summer. And so she had a team that I was on, that she and I worked together on kind of a home visit protocol following the LEAP model. And she really led the home visits that happened over the summer. And during the home visits, often, well, I don't know, like percentage wise, if it was off more than often than not, but there were a number of families who it became evident that they needed more support than just a home visit from school. So we gave out a lot of referral paperwork during that process as well.
Penny McKeon, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we are at 12:30. I didn't know how much longer you have. Would you like to break for lunch now, or are you close to wrapping it up?
Well, whenever an attorney said they're close to wrapping it up, it's typically not true.
I'm familiar with.
Yes. I'd say maybe another half hour at the outset. I mean, at the utmost.
Why don't we break now then
Okay.
for lunch, since it is 12:30, and we'll resume back here at 1:15. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you.
Miss Cody can use that break as well. Okay. Maybe you can ask.
Chili.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Alan that do it because.
Well, I think Susan is. Oh, it's okay.
I know the same thing. Yeah. That's right. Explain. I think you need to pay that.
Next out of here, we're at interest being paid, which is the first conference.
Oh, for lunch?
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna
Stay there,
go use.
go back there, but you always have a grab. Go back.
I'm gonna use the latest round as well. Would be in there for lunch in a minute.
And everything should be labeled.
Okay,
So.
all right.
You're welcome.
We should start on some 45 minutes.
Here. Alden, could you get the doors? Thank you.
Vice Chair Bennett, one moment, I get to my equipment.
Okay.
Are these open for lunch? Because everybody's not here. My husband returned this year.
I think everyone's back.
Oh, yeah, I think everybody's
Yeah.
here. That was here. She is.
Yeah.
Miss Cody,
she's
you
here.
can come up. Wilson. Okay. Welcome back. We are resuming our hearing, and resuming with Attorney McKeon.
Thank you. Ms. Cody, I know that when we broke for lunch, I was asking you some questions regarding CHR
Yes,
and about the groundwork that was being done prior to the beginning of the 2023, 2024 school year. And you indicated that you were talking about the LEAP program, the home visits with respect to students who had, I presume, chronic absenteeism.
yes.
And I can't remember now if I asked you this or I was going to ask you this. So I'll ask it again. I'm sorry if I did already ask it. Do you have an opinion as to whether student mental health needs have any involvement with chronic absenteeism?
I do.
And what is that opinion?
I think that not all the times, but sometimes, probably more often than not, chronic absenteeism is a symptom of struggles with any number of things that impact mental health.
So with the start of the 2023-2024 school year, CHR was on site.
Yes,
And I believe you testified, at least at the beginning, there's one day in the high school and one day in the middle school.
I believe so.
Okay.
It might have been a half day. It may have started off with because it was intakes that were being scheduled with a couple kids who were already being seen by CHR, who then got moved to being seen at school. For like the first 2 weeks or so, it may have been one day that was split. I can't remember the timeline of when Megan added a second day.
With respect to the intakes, well, let me go back a step. Do you recall how many people were, I don't know how the proper terminology is, signed up for it or had been referred to it as far as to it being CHR?
So I know that there had been close to 100 families who paperwork had been shared with through either the early identification process, so of kids that we were aware of, or kids that came up through a home visit, for example. So I'm sorry, I should have looked at that right before, but I know that I feel like it was about 100 in the fall.
Okay.
But that was like the first, so the process first was they got the paperwork and then it was returned to us. So we passed out more paperwork than actually was returned.
Right. So with respect to the number 100, was that the amount you had sent out or the amount you had gotten back?
No, not the amount we got back.
Okay.
Early, like first round, I would say maybe I don't want to misspeak, but we probably, like I think Christina and her team had done like 60 something home visits. And that started in the summer, but continued into the first several weeks of the school year. And so that was like an ongoing thing where paperwork was being turned in I want to say that we probably had maybe 4 students who had been through the intake process before we even started school. So those students started being seen in the school buildings right away because they had gone through the intake process prior to the first day of school.
And, excuse me, I apologize. As the school year progressed, did that number of 4, did that increase?
Yes, yes, very significantly. So we can, at the beginning of the school year, or over the summer, there's a mailing that goes home to all families in the district that has a, how can we help? And it's basically asking families if there's different resources that they are looking for. And it's pretty comprehensive. So one section of it is counseling or mental health support for your child, and then there's also things like energy assistance, food insecurity, looks at all the different factors that can perhaps contribute to chronic absenteeism or difficulty with mental health. So that we had gotten several that way too. So several referrals. So I would say that our overall, like we passed out more paperwork than we got back.
And was there a set time of the sessions? In other words, when the kids were, if the kids were meeting with the CHR employee, was it a set amount of time that each session was?
Yes, about 45 minutes, 45 to 53.
Okay.
To be specific. 53 minutes is the cutoff for insurance for the length of a session.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So kids need to speak quickly. All right, so there are sessions 45 to 52 minutes and 1 day a week. Are you aware was there a backup as far as, or backlog of students who wanted to speak with the CHR therapist?
So in order to add a clinician or a day to for a CHR provider to come to the district, we needed to have generally between 8 and 9 students who had completed it in order to make it financial or in order for us for them to pull somebody from the clinic or hire a clinician for that whole day. So there would be a backlog until that number got to 8 or 9. And then we would add another day, but that we added the extra day relatively early. So the clinicians, the original clinician who started with us had a full day at the high school and a full day at the intermediate school. And then we added a second clinician for a full day at the middle school. So we had 3 full days of services.
Those are the only 2 schools that had CHR.
Yes.
Okay. You had indicated before that when it came down to generations, when that was being discussed, that there was some opposition. Your understanding was that the opposition was based, at least in part, upon parent rights or parent consent, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And that concern that was expressed by the majority of the board, that did not carry over to CHR?
No, there was another agency that was introduced in between generations and CHR. And the board was interested in pursuing both, like first that one, another one, and then CHR, and was supportive of bringing them on. We had to do, there's a similar registration packet for CHR. So
Similar to Generations?
yes.
So did you form any understanding as to why the prior concern about parent involvement, or however you want to phrase it, why that had changed?
So my recollection of it is, it was in just the wording of how questions were asked in the different venues, because I didn't see very much difference in what was going to be provided, because for CHR, their practice, well, so that is different. Their practice is to see kids once they are registered. And that had been in my experience, as a school clinician, all of the agencies that I was pursuing to see if they would have interest in working with us had a registration process. Similar, they all had parent consent before they would start seeing a child. So I think that was what people felt most comfortable with.
So based upon that testimony, is it fair to say that if a student would be unable to self-refer the CHR?
So we did have self-referrals now, but it's like, and there's kind of theory and practice. So we had a number of kids who self-referred in that they went to a school counselor and said, I really would like to participate with CHR. So, and hadn't been previously identified as somebody where they would, they were necessarily like on the radar for requiring services. But so in that sense, students did have the ability to say, I would like to participate in this. They still then went through the process though.
Of obtaining parental consent?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of any situation in which a child would say, you know, the issues with my parents, or I don't want my parents to know?
I am aware of kids saying that, like on the news, and like when we had we had like an assembly with students in May after our student passed away, and we had discussions with kids about CHR coming, and we had a few different opportunities for kids to kind of find their voice about mental health and what they would like and what kind of things that they would want to be able to access without their parents. So I am aware of kids saying that. I'm not aware of a student saying that, like asking for help and then not getting it. So as a school counselor, part of my job was always to, if I thought a child would benefit from it, make a recommendation or a suggestion to a family that they may benefit from more outpatient behavioral health. So that hasn't changed as far as like, there's always parents who are very open to that. And there's always been parents who are not open to that. So every district I've been at, and I think the school mental health people accept that that's kind of part of it. when you're working with kids, that kids are part of their system. But I've always looked at it like my role professionally is to help those parents to see the benefits of it, or alternatively, identify other ways that we can support the child that isn't against what the parents want.
Well, ultimately, if a student took the position, they didn't want their parent to know, they would always have the option to see like a social worker or a school counselor within the schools, correct?
Yes,
Okay, because that did not require parental consent.
it did not.
Um, you were part of central office, we've established that. I'm talking about not in your pupil, well, I'm sure you were as part of being director of pupil personnel services, but I'm talking now about director of mental health. And in that position, what was the chain of command there? Who did you report to?
So, originally, when the position was created, I believe that I reported to Bob Angeli,
Okay,
but I worked closely with Sue as well, with the assistant superintendent as well.
that's Susan Nash.
Yes.
And was there's an organizational chart? Would the line be from you to the superintendent at that point?
So there was not, my position wasn't on the organizational chart when it started. So, no. But when I was in pupil services, that position is under Bob's.
Okay.
And then, the director of mental health position, when we updated the organizational chart, is under the assistant superintendent.
How about how building principals? Obviously they're they're in charge of their building, but they must also report to central office, I presume.
Yes,
And who did they report to?
the superintendent.
Did that have any effect on your ability to work with the building principals?
I think yes. I've never really been a hierarchical leader. But I think I found in some districts that is important to have a clear definition of who reports to who. And so therefore it is kind of hierarchical. And I think it would have been maybe if my role had been more defined as being not separate, it may have been different.
Were other central office administrators, were they all reporting to the superintendent?
So my role is the only one that had, that would require an 092. Because and that essentially is supervisory, right? So like it required an administrative role. There were other people that worked in central office that report to the assistant superintendent. But they're different roles. So like our director of IT, transportation director.
But you were the only one with the 092 certification that did not report directly to the superintendent?
Yes.
I just want to circle back and then I honestly, I don't have that many more questions for you. But circling back to some of the testimony you gave earlier, you said you talked about the fact that you had always had, in your career, had very good positive relationships with members of the community. But then there came a point in your position as director of mental health where that seemed to have changed. Is that fair?
Sort of.
Okay.
So I have, in Killingly is not different from my other roles in that I've been, had very positive working relationships with families and community agencies across roles. But I think that was specifically in relation to the complaint and the parents.
Let me interrupt you for a minute. The complaint, you mean the 10-4B?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Yes, so I think because my role was mental health, I think it's natural that it kind of came in the spotlight. And so I think from a certain group, I felt a little not supported personally and professionally.
Okay.
Which I recognize that that's ironic.
When this school implementation plan came out, which has been marked state exhibit 3, and I asked you questions about it with respect to the barriers that are listed here. Had you at that point already started to think about leaving Killingly?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I've had challenges there since I started, even in people services, with the same kind of things. But I didn't actually, like I don't think so, not when that was done. Maybe around November is when I started thinking maybe I should. So it was probably somewhat around that. I started like my private practice, just one day a week. But I thought that would be enough to, actually, at the time, I thought that would be enough to kind of make me feel like I'm really making a difference in my own community. And so I don't know that it was like related to the implementation plan or anything, but it was, I mean, it had been a challenge for some time.
Yeah, you've used that word challenge a couple of times. And well, I think you used challenge and you used also in the plural sense of challenges. Can you give a little bit more specificity as to what you mean when you say challenge?
Yeah, I think just I didn't feel like I was different from when I was a building principal, because when I was a building principal, I felt like I'm kind of like, it's like you have your island of people, and you kind of do have ultimate decision-making things about what I'd like. I mean, obviously in concert with the superintendent and everything, but this was different because I think I anticipated that it would change when I went into the role, because when I was in people services, I wasn't necessarily an expert in people services. But I do consider myself, I always have things to learn, but I do consider myself to have a certain level of expertise with mental health. So I think the specifics are generally around being able to decide if a student needs certain supports and being able to advocate for the school team with colleagues that, yeah, this is mental health. I should be able to be the one who is making these decisions. And like, I had it like circumstances where, you know, like after the student passed away, where I was marginalized. I felt marginalized. And I felt like I was asked to leave a meeting that had all the counselors in it in the high school, like things like that, that it's like, I should be leading this. And I felt that I wasn't able to. And I don't know if that's because of hierarchy. Like I'm not, the hierarchy wasn't even in place then. But I always just felt like if it has to do with mental health, I should be, or this position should be the driver of that. Secondarily, it should be the building level mental health people, the people who have gone to school for it. And if at the very least they're certified as school mental health workers, but Killingly has a really actually a higher percentage of school mental health workers than I've experienced in my career who are also licensed by the Department of Public Health. So there's school certification to be a school mental health worker, which requires like a planned program of study and, you know, certification. And then there's another level that is strictly mental health that you pursue through the State Department of Public Health. And we have a number of licensed clinical social workers and certified who are also certified school social workers and licensed professional counselors who are also certified school counselors. So, and ideally, those are the people. So those are the people who we have people right in the district with a great deal of experience determining mental health needs, mental health supports that are appropriate. So like I said at the very beginning, I am all for bringing in additional supports. But it needs to be really like an outside agency shouldn't be like the white horse that's going to come and save us, right? Like you have people that are working in the district who know what they're doing and are really good at it and are really dedicated to kids and to families in the district. And I think that is, that's who should be the driver of decision-making for mental health.
You testified that you were asked to leave a meeting of school counselors. Did the counselors ask you to leave? Who asked you to leave?
No. Administration,
Well, when you say administration, building level or central office?
building level.
Was there any explanation given as to why you should leave this meeting?
Honestly, I don't remember at the time. But there were a series of microaggressions like that.
And did these microaggressions, or these occasions, were they at one school or across different schools? Well, let me ask you a different question. You were asked to leave a meeting with counselors. What school did that occur at?
The high school.
So it's fair to assume it was building leadership that asked you to leave the meeting?
Yes.
And were there similar incidents in any of the other schools?
I think there was that kind of like dance for power in other schools, but I think it was more at the high school, and potentially that could be my perception because I've always considered myself a high school person. So I anticipated going in that was going to be the easiest for me to, and it was on many levels, working with the school counselors, and the lead counselor and the social workers. So, that part was very easy. And I tried to advocate for, on their behalf as much as I could in my role.
Being asked to leave a meeting of counselors, did you feel as if your authority had been undercut?
Yeah.
Testified that you felt that these individuals, these school mental health professionals who are, as you testified, are best trained to address student mental health needs. It appears as if you're saying they were not being given proper voice. Is that a fair perception?
That was my opinion.
Okay. And you also testified that you were feeling marginalized, not you personally, but you in your professional position as director of mental health, that position was being marginalized. And who, in your opinion, was the author of this marginalization? I mean, who was making you feel marginalized?
I think I've consistently had the most trouble with people that are administrators or current or past at the high school.
And when something like this happened, like when you're asked to leave the meeting with the counselors, did you ever discuss this with anyone in central office?
Yes.
And with whom did you discuss it?
With Kim and Sue.
Just,
Yeah, I'm sorry. Kim Burnham is our director of HR, Human Resources.
And Susan Nash, the superintendent? You said Sue too.
So at that point, she was not.
Oh.
Bob too. So at that point, when that one happened, I talked to Bob about it and Kim.
Okay.
And probably Sue because we were friendly.
Right. And do you know if anything happened as a result of that? With respect to
I didn't
sharing
see
your
any
access?
difference.
No.
I didn't ever see any difference.
Were there occasions when you would offer, again, in your, not personally, but in your role as director of mental health, that you would offer opinions as to what interventions could be implemented with, let's say, like the high school
Mhm.
administration?
Yes.
And did you get any sense as to whether or not there was agreement?
With my opinion?
Yes.
Or no.
You didn't get a sense that there, okay. And it's on my fault the way I asked the question. Did you not have an opinion, or you got the feeling that your opinion was not being valued?
I think that like it kind of illustrates the position. Is that if an administrator raises a concern about the mental health of a student, and then I would go in because we developed a risk assessment procedure that we had followed at NFA, and it's pretty widely accepted from South Carolina. So I would go in and as a first line, generally with another school mental health worker and do an assessment. And from that assessment, you determine if there's a higher level of assessment needed. And I don't, there were situations where they didn't agree with me or CHR or their assessment or my assessment.
And when you say they, who are you referring to? The
High
building
school administration and pupil services.
Was this occurring during the current 2023, 2024 school year?
Yes.
How about following or near the end of the 2022, 2023 school year when the one high school student was thought to commit suicide? That didn't change the approach at the high school?
No. I think that's when it kind of came to a head more because I was sort of newly in that role. So prior to that, I was in pupil services. And when I was in pupil services, I dealt more with the elementary schools, and the assistant director of pupil services dealt with more with like the day-to-day kind of stuff at the middle school and the high school.
Did you believe in the role you were serving as director of mental health?
Did I believe in it?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you feel that you were dedicated in that role?
Yes, very.
Was it difficult then to make the decision to leave Killingly?
Yes, it was very, very difficult. I've spent my whole career in school working for school districts, and I've really enjoyed it.
What was it ultimately that forced you to make that difficult decision?
I think it was just a combination of like being, trying to identify. I've always been like very mission driven in my work, and kind of looking for where I can have a significant impact. That's always been really important to me. And I'm not minimizing the impact that I have had in Killingly, because my leadership style, I think, is very different from many of the leaders, not just in Killingly, but I think just in schools probably. So yeah, I think that it was hard to leave, and it was kind of a combination of things. I had started my private practice, and that was really like blew up very quickly. And I really loved that, and I felt all the time there that I was really making a difference.
Use your term mission. If you felt that your mission as director of mental health had been appropriately supported, would you have quit?
I don't think so.
Can I have a moment? I just need a minute.
Excuse me? Oh, yes, I did. I'm sorry. No, he just got up and walked in.
Thank you. Ms. Cody, happiest words a witness can hear. I have no further questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Attorney Noonan?
I also like to make witnesses happy. I have no questions. Thank you.
Feinstein?
I have no such concerns. I need microphone.
Oh, I apologize.
Well, you can speak loudly, Andy. I speak up plenty loudly enough.
Andy's booming voice is well known to all.
With the board's permission, with the panel's permission, can I move over there so I can actually see the witness?
Of course you can. Yeah,
Want me to just switch?
No, that's okay.
I think he just wants to be in front of
Oh.
her instead of.
Oh, all right. So say I can see.
It's just her.
Andy, let's just sit here together.
No, it's fine, you're good. So I can keep an eye on Attorney Noonan. Just a second, let me sort of get myself in order here. All right, I really want to focus in on the issue of parental rights. And let me ask if you recognize this document.
Thanks.
Yes, I can see
Um,
what it is.
Is this an exhibit already here?
I put it in my list of exhibits. I'm not sure it's not introduced. I'm going to, as soon as the witness identifies it, I'm going to ask for it to be made a document, made
So-
an exhibit.
Yep, so this is looks like the implementation plan that was developed between Killingly Public Schools and Generations for a school-based health center.
And would it be accurate to say that this was probably around January of 22?
I think so.
I'd ask for its introduction.
No objection from me.
Okay.
Do you know what number it is, Andy?
Oh, sorry.
I think it was introduced. It's been introduced, hasn't it?
Well, it's in my note.
Lots of things are in your name. I think we've seen this.
So we think it's.
I think it's already been introduced.
So was your testimony that you were not intimately involved in the development of the contract generations? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That you're not intimately involved,
I was not.
because you were student services and this was not really in your bailiwick at that point. Is that correct?
That's an assumption on my part,
Okay.
but yeah, I was not. I was very focused on pupil services at the time.
So I'm. But you are familiar with the procedures being used by CHR, or at least the procedures being used by CHR while you were still in Killingly, correct?
Yes.
What is your understanding, for referring to this document, what is your understanding of the difference in issues of parental rights, parental consent, between what Generations proposed to do and what CHR was in fact doing?
Can you repeat that? What do I see as the differences?
Differences between the issues of parental rights between the two providers.
I don't really think that there's much difference other than I think at one point I had heard that the space that Generations wanted would include like a space for a secretary or something, like that they had like someone in front of the clinicians. But that's what I think. I mean, I think that in practice, I think it's the same. I mean, they're both agencies that provide mental health supports to kids within schools.
Okay, if we look at this document, there are section that starting in the bottom of the first page talks about entry to care. First is school referrals. And it's my understanding that most of the referrals to CHR, at least at the beginning, were school referrals. Is that correct?
No. No, not really, because they all have to come from the parent. Like they were coming from, can you clarify that?
Okay.
Like identified by the school as
Right,
needing-
in listening to your presentation before the board sometime in January, I think it was, and in prior testimony, I got the sense that for whatever reason, that the students who were referred to CHR were referred by the school. Yeah,
We facilitated the referral process for them.
and you identified the students who you thought were in need of that level of service, correct?
Yes.
And that was the primary means of entry into CHR services, school referral at that point, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, except for necessarily on the list as I think the first line of, so generally kids that have high attendance concerns
Mhm.
are more appropriate for like care coordination or something like that, which CHR also provides.
Okay.
Than they may be for school-based services, because if they're coming to school, if they're not coming to school, you're losing a spot for a kid that is coming to school.
Okay. In terms of the parents, so your colleague is running the LEAP program and you're doing home visits over the summer in order to kids who have shown high levels of absenteeism, correct?
Mhm.
And you're saying that some parents in those home visits said, that I know CHR is in district and I'd like to have a referral to CHR?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you know how many of those cases there would be of that?
I don't off the
Okay.
top of my head.
Okay, but and it's, at least in terms of the initial cohort of students seeing CHR, it was one of those two routes, right? Either the
No.
school identification or the parent asking.
No, because as I said, there were like four completed. There were families who had reached out to CHR before we even had the services within the school, and they just transferred them to school-based services. So the initial kids that we saw in school were totally parent-driven because they had gone through the referral process in the clinic, not at the school.
They had relationships with CHR predating the school's involvement with CHR?
Yes, so what happens is, like, as a school counselor, for example, I would keep a list of referrals, places that I know may be accepting new patients. And so if I had a student who I thought would benefit from a referral, either just through my own experience with the student or in a conversation with a parent at a meeting or something like that, I would give the parent that list. And so sometimes CHR would be one that was on there because CHR has had much quicker availability than Generations and then some of the other area providers.
Okay, so you said 4 students came that route.
Yes, at the very beginning. So like as of September 11th, which is our first day of seeing Killingly Public Schools students in the Killingly Public Schools, I think there were 4 or 5.
Okay. And if you turn to the second page of this, there's an opportunity for parent referrals, and you said that some were parent referrals, right? Although this, on page 2, it says the parent guardian contacts the school-based health center directly to make an appointment for their child to have an assessment for care. Is that available was that available with CHR when you were there?
Yes, those are the ones. They reach out. Well, it's not the school-based health center. They would reach out to CHR.
To
CHR. Which
Right.
effectively is our school-based health center.
Right. And that is available to parents.
Yes.
And have you publicized that to parents?
So I know that like the parent has indicated that they were interested in services or like on what we sent home. And I spoke with those families. Yes, they are aware of it. And they were made aware of it when like in the handbook and things like this, but the process always starts with the school clinician, the school counselor. Yeah, well, generally in a school.
Okay, but if I'm reading this document correctly.
This generations document.
That Generations would have allowed parents to call Generations directly. Is that correct?
But CHR does too. I mean, I can't speak for Generations.
Right.
But the number that we've always given out to parents is the triage number, which goes to CHR as a centralized kind of call center, and then they direct it where it needs to go. And if it's a child that there's a number of kids who, for example, don't want to be seen in school.
Okay.
So those families, any family would start with the triage center. The triage phone number if they don't want to go through the school counselor.
Okay, let's move to the bottom of that page.
This page 2, Ed.
Page 2, yes, sir. It says, for student self-referral, the student may contact the school-based health center receptionist directly to schedule an appointment for an assessment or to ask questions about the services available at the school-based health center. Is that the same for CHR?
If the receptionist is answering the triage number, it'd be the same. But this is what I was saying, like with Generations, that I believe this was probably where I remember that information from,
Right.
that they were gonna have a receptionist that worked for them.
Okay.
But
Is the triage center part of the school-based health center, or is that just
CHR,
CHR generally?
yes.
It's Willimantic or whatever, and you can just
Yep.
call it the number.
Mhm.
And so it has really nothing to do with the school-based health center, right? Except that the referral could be back to the school-based health center.
If it were appropriate, it would be funneled to in the same way that a receptionist would. If someone called and wanted services from CHR and they wanted them in school, they would talk to that person at CHR. Maybe if we had gone with Generations, a receptionist at Generations, who would still take the same information and then pass it on to the school-based clinicians.
And then if you look at page 3, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, there is a Connecticut statute, as you, I'm sure, well aware, that allows teenagers under certain circumstances to see a clinician now for an unlimited number of sessions without parental knowledge or consent under certain circumstances. In this document, Generations specifies the provisions of that statute and basically says that's what we're going to abide by. Is there any similar commitment from CHR to abide by that statute?
I would imagine
Well,
that they would follow the state law.
was that question? I mean, you worked with them in developing the proposal. Did you talk
I'm-
about?
I've always been working under how it works in schools, and my experience is that the school-based services are generally not kind of drop-in centers, like as far as like if someone has immediate crisis needs, those are the school-based clinicians that handle that. So, and kids are way more there's like practice, which is that kids go to the people that they have relationships with, which is why it's so important to focus on giving the staff, the school-based mental health people, what they need in order to be able to develop those relationships with kids, because they should be the ones that are identifying, like if it's a higher, like helping a child, it's developmentally appropriate for them, someone with a background in mental health, who they know as part of their school community, to offer guidance to them as far as, you know what, you and I could meet. Why don't we start there? Start in a school-based kind of thing. Or if the child's saying, no, I really want an outside therapist, then all right, let's make that happen for you. But it's generally, that is why there's school mental health workers, in order to help facilitate services that are needed, because they are aware of all of the services both within their own school, which a lot of kids and families might not be aware of unless they try to access it. And CHR has been an excellent provider. They have been very flexible with us, been very patient, been very responsive. They have been excellent. So I guess this is kind of what I was talking about before, that it gets a little funky because I, like, with all due respect, I've felt that the good work that is being accomplished with perhaps a different agency from what you had originally wanted is being attacked. And that's an uncomfortable position for me, having worked very directly with CHR, and knowing, for example, that when we want to increase our days and, something has happened, there's a kink in the process that we need to take a step back and look at this, and that we had a number of families that were filling out paperwork, for example, and not showing up for the intake. So we had a very high number of families that was happening with. So CHR, instead of they were collaborating with us and saying, you know what, this is an issue. Let's meet. Let's get the teams together and figure out how we can build this to work collaboratively and get these kids what they need. And so there's been times where, because it's new for us, we've had to adjust our process, and we've looked to them kind of for guidance on what has worked before. But they've been incredibly responsive to us. And when I would frequently update my list of outside providers that I shared with all of the school mental health workers, including for med management, for inpatient counseling, and for not inpatient, in-person, sorry, for in-person therapy and virtual therapy across the state. When every time that I updated that, I would call the local groups, including Generations, and say, what's your timeline? What's your waiting list? And was told, we've been telling everybody to call CHR because they have the most clinicians. So that's my reality working with CHR, but there's all this noise kind of that, in all due respect, because I feel like we're working for the same thing, but the way it all came about was very uncomfortable because, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. And I also want to make clear that neither I nor my clients have any particular brief for Generations. It was, they came up with a proposal that seemed appropriate. It was voted down by the board. Now CHR is in, and at least according to your testimony, CHR is doing exactly what Generations said they were going to do, and that the issue that seemed to defeat Generations, the parental involvement issue, doesn't seem to be any difference, at least that you can point out, between what CHR and what Generations is doing. Is that all correct?
That's my experience. Okay. I mean, my experience, if a parent is not, doesn't agree to outpatient therapy, there is a state law that allows kids to access that. So I always kind of look for solutions. So whether that's the same kind of thing, like what if it's not an immediate where it's going to be in school, let's look for something that you can get actually immediate
Well, okay.
outpatient behavioral health.
So the statute, this provision of the statute is obviously directed at two situations.
Mhm.
One situation is the kid who's being abused and beaten at home and wants to talk to somebody about it. And the second situation is obviously the child who has gender concerns and or sexual identity concerns and wants to, process those issues without their parents knowing about it. What was there special protocols for that you were involved in with in-school staff on how to deal with those two situations?
Oh, yes. Like, so there's where everybody's mandated reporter training, has mandated reporter training as far as how to recognize signs of abuse and neglect. And I mean, oftentimes the classroom teacher is actually the first line of defense for things like that, for abuse and things of that nature, abuse and neglect. Absenteeism could be a symptom also. And so certainly that is something that anybody who works in schools is very aware of the potential for abuse and neglect, and therefore our responsibility to intervene.
Well, let me just push back a little bit on that. DCF reported in testimony recently that 2 to 3% of referrals from schools for abuse and neglect are substantiated. So it's obviously not a system that's working the way it's designed to work.
That 2 to 3% of what?
Referrals by schools
Okay.
are substantiated.
Can I just
I'm not
ask
clear
whether
about
there's a
what your
question?
point is.
Okay.
Or is it just a discussion?
Angie,
Yeah, use your microphone.
and I'm wondering the same thing. Are you asking a question?
I'll get to, yeah. So I mean, besides the mandated reporter, how did your counselors deal with issues of both sexual identity and abuse at home?
So I would actually say that Killingly has a higher substantiation rate than most of the state for DCF reports. So the statistics in Killingly are that there are reports being made and that they are substantiated, unfortunately. I would say that there is, but that speaks to, again, what we've been saying, that I've always believed that there is a high need, that you indeed cannot separate mental health from academics and education. I've always believed that. And so I think you meet kids where they're at, period. Like what they bring to you, that's what you deal with. So whether it's gender, sexuality, abuse, all of those things are what is part of the kind of the daily, that's why we have school mental health workers, to support kids in dealing with these very serious issues that happen in their lives. And there's systemic issues that I think as any school district, we try to look at, and we try to figure out how we can do better. We always want to do better, but like, for example, I would never disparage CHR. They've been excellent, but there's clinicians start off somewhere. All clinicians have to start off somewhere, right? Like as their license. There's a licensed, you get your license based on the number of hours that you've worked and the number of years that you've been doing the work. The school mental health workers that are employed by Killingly Public Schools are at professional license level. They're not licensed masters. They're not licensed professional counselor associates. They're not licensed master's level.
So Are they the lowest level of licensing, are you saying?
There's levels based on experience and
Okay.
based on years in service. On supervised experience that you've had working. This is for the Department of Public Health licensure.
Yep.
So generally, and this is, they're supervised. So, but there's a difference between the amount of experience that someone who's a master's level clinician has versus someone who's beyond that. So my point is that in our schools, Killingly has actually like a higher percentage than the other districts that I've worked in of people who are not only certified by the state of Connecticut, but also have worked long enough doing mental health licensed level work to have not need to be supervised anymore because they have put in the time and the work and the learning, the professional learning in order to renew their license every year. Not that it's actually more stringent to do that than it is to get a school certification because you have to take a class, you have to make sure that you demonstrate that you've had training that year in ethics, professional ethics, and in equity, which includes, gender identity, sexuality, those types of things.
So you talked earlier about the substantial turnover in school counselors on the high school level in the last year. Your statements about the higher level of staff, is that true before and after the changeover of staff?
It's the same. The ones who have their licenses are still there for the most part, except for the social workers, but they were replaced by licensed social workers. So that it's probably and I don't mean to disparage people who only have their school certification because you have a very high level of education in mental health, just having your certification.
Hmm.
But I'm just trying to make the point that as an LPC, I have more experience in mental health than somebody who's just coming in at their master's level. And Killingly Public Schools employs people at KMS, KIT, the intermediate school, and the high school who are fully licensed by the state of Connecticut Department of Public Health, as well as being fully certified at a professional level of certification by the Connecticut State Department of Education.
And that's true of the new counselors at the high school who started in September of 23.
No, they're school certified. They have their certification in the state, like for the state of Connecticut, they have their school certification, but they don't have their license. The social workers do.
Okay,
That are
but the
there.
social workers are not the ones dealing directly with counseling students, except for,
No, they are.
I thought you said they were the ones who were providing counseling under IEPs, but not
They are.
to the walk-in students.
No, they do too. They do walk-ins too. It's just that part was about equity because they had a high, when I was director of pupil services, they were spending more time doing the responsive counseling than they had to do the IEP counseling.
Okay, but I was clear that in your testimony, you said that the basic job of school social workers was to provide IEP counseling, and the counseling for the general population was done by school counselors.
No,
No?
if I said that, then I misspoke because I did say that school social workers do predominantly do all of their one of their important roles is that they provide the IEP counseling. So the counseling for students that have an IEP, have it on their IEP.
Right.
But they also provide counseling for kids who need counseling. In the same way that, like, what I was referring to before was the responsive counseling, like triage model that was in place.
Yeah.
And my concern at that point was that I was the director of pupil services. And I could see that there was not equity with the amount of time that the social work role specifically had. But this is just the high school, that they had, versus the number of counselors, school counselors that there were. But it didn't have anything to do with license or everybody was certified.
Let me move to something else. You mentioned staff mental health counseling.
Mhm.
Is that a need, Kelly? Is there a need?
I think there's a need for everybody to have counseling. I'm a huge proponent for it. Yeah, I mean, I think, but I do think, as I said, that it's been a stressful place to work because we're in the spotlight and the good work that people are doing is being questioned. And I respect why it started and I respect this process. But if I were to say that hasn't had an impact on the people that are doing the day-to-day work, if I said it didn't, I'd be lying. Because it does have an impact.
Was there any program while you were there to provide counseling to staff members who were having mental health needs?
So there's an EAP, like there isn't any other place of employment. So employees can seek out the employee assistance program if they're in need of mental health support.
Okay, but you suggested there was a special need for mental health support because of the stress of Killingly, correct?
No.
No?
Well, I mean, like I said, it's been a challenge, lots of challenges after the pandemic, but also in particular to how things like with our former board, things like that it's been stressful. But I think we all, we've all kind of come through this collective experience of first the pandemic and now in Killingly, all of this.
So the answer to the question is there was no special program to provide mental health services to staff except for the general EAP program, correct?
Well, I would say that the EAP program is, and I would say also that I think I spent a huge amount of my time going around and working with people to try to keep them from leaving.
Okay, so it was a service you provided, but it wasn't specifically part of a job description, right?
Well, no, because I think in leadership, your job first is to support the people so that they can support the kids.
Now, you said when you were first made director of mental health, student support and family engagement, that you reported right to Bob Angeli, right?
Yes.
When did it change that you reported to the assistant superintendent?
In the fall, this past fall of 23.
And that was after Angeli was not renewed and Sue Nash took over as superintendent?
Yes.
Right. Finally, are you aware of whether CHR has a waiting list now for as part of the school-based health center?
Yeah, I am not aware as of today.
Today, okay.
Like
How
what they're,
about how about February 1st?
So February 1st, we were in the process of having meetings with the team, like I had said, to kind of recalibrate with the referral teams in the buildings so that to try to figure out what was happening, because we had many families that were signing up and not following through. And so that ends up being a huge time waster for CHR and for other kids who are looking to get services, because the intake is like 90 minutes is devoted to an intake. So when a family doesn't, like, no calls, no shows on an intake, there's ripple effects that are difficult. And so but once we like identified that this is an issue, we have to kind of figure out what's going on. Is it something that we should be doing more of? How can we work with families so that they, understand the importance of the intake, that kind of thing. Like, so that was what was happening before, right when those meetings were happening.
But the question was there a waiting list?
Yes,
How big was the waiting list?
I don't remember.
And as of February 1st, how many hours of coverage CHR provided, both the high school and the intermediate school?
There were 3 full days total. So,
Between the two schools?
yep, in the schools. But they also, each clinician also had half a day in the Danielson Clinic for family, if there were multiple children in the same family that were referred. And it was determined that it would be maybe more effective to, instead of having 3 slots during the school day, maybe they would benefit from having family counseling. They could do that at the Danielson Clinic.
And was CHR in the process of hiring additional clinicians when you were leaving?
They were in the process of actually giving Jared another day. So at the very least, hiring for the clinic so that they could free up a clinician who is already working in the schools to do additional days.
Thank you very much.
Any close?
Nothing further. Stay, thank you.
Can I ask just a couple
Yeah,
of questions?
yes.
I really will be brief. Ms. Cody, first of all, thanks for coming here today. We know you're no longer on the payroll at Killingly, so we appreciate your attendance. You mentioned how satisfied you were with what CHR was doing and how cooperative they were with you. And they were seeing students certain students on a regular basis, seeing the same student again and again, right?
Yes,
Is continuity of care in terms of having the same clinician, is that something that's important in emotional health?
I think so.
Is it particularly important with children?
Probably.
And if the result of this hearing were to replace CHR with generations, what impact does that have on all of these students that are getting good quality care from the CHR providers?
I think that would be a huge mistake. I think it would be a disservice to the work that's being done, and that will continue to be done. I have nothing against generations. I just know from experience that CHR has been wonderful partners. And I think like you said, for continuity of care, it's important, but they're just a different agency. So you need to get their processes, you have to change. There'd be a lot that would have to be changed, I would think.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
I have a couple, if that's okay. Ms. Cody, excuse me. And this might be a little bit outside scope of the question you're asking. I apologize, but I think you touched upon this before when I was directly examining you, but was it a conscious decision not to have CHR at the lower schools? In other words, the elementary school and the intermediate school?
Yes and no. My goal would be to expand it to all of the schools, but we had to look where I think we had a sense definitely that the high school was definitely in need of it, and that KISS would also have a high level of need. And the KISS, we've had many more completed referrals from KISS, from the intermediate school than we have from the high school, which is why there's been 2 days at KISS and 1 day at the high school. It's a directly related to the number of referrals that have been completed by families.
So when you talk about the possibility of expand, CHR were to hire another individual so they could free up their school-based therapist for another day, do you have an understanding as to whether that would be at the high school or the middle school?
So if it were up to me, if I were still there, it would be focused on probably at the high school.
Okay,
Because now we had enough kids that we could have a full day, an additional full day of services at the high school in particular.
right. The question he just asked, Attorney Noonan made an excellent point about continuity of care. If, however, there's a possibility of retaining or entering into an agreement with Generations to address the lower level schools, would that be a bad thing?
So I don't think any mental health is bad. Like, I think any supports that can be put in place are good. I think it's actually when we had two really good presentations when we were looking for a group, and I approached both and said, maybe one could work at KISS and one could work at the high school. And they both said, that's not the best for continuity of care, because what we found is that we've got families that we're serving. So they might have a kiddo in the high school and a kiddo at the intermediate school.
Okay.
So it's actually better if you have your druthers, right? It's better to have that continuity of care across levels as well.
Okay. And that makes sense. So you say that the middle school is where you had the 2 days a week, that seemed to be the most need. And do you have any understanding based upon either your professional background or your time in your role with Killingly? Is that something that generally starts manifesting itself at the middle school? That means mental health needs, or that something that perhaps has developed into the lower grade, but then becomes more pronounced in the middle school?
Can you rephrase that? Sorry.
Oh, why?
I just want.
No,
Like, is it
okay,
normal?
Yeah, let me. In other words, there is the greatest need you saw was at the middle school. The greatest need for mental health interventions, based upon your experience, or at least your time in Killingly, is that something that generally would suddenly, this need would manifest itself at the middle school level, or would it be something that would be the evolution or devolution from maybe prior issues? That maybe the child was starting to have
Okay.
issues at the lower grades?
Yeah, I think though, I think at the middle school, parents are still very involved in what's going on with their kids. Generally, just developmentally, it's very appropriate for parents to have much more of a, kind of be more in the driver's seat for their kids when they're in middle school and high school, they start kind of backing off a little, which is appropriate developmentally. So I think that could have contributed to us getting a high number of referrals from the middle school. But that's not to say then that the parents are not involved at the high school at all. They're very involved, but there's other options that some kids have already started utilizing before there was a school-based health center. So like they were seeing somebody online, for example. Like, that was a good thing that came out of the pandemic, is that you can see somebody as long as they're in the state of Connecticut anywhere virtually. So, and generally the older a kid is, that works better for a high school age kid. So high school kids may have those needs met in different ways than that aren't as effective for middle school kids.
Okay. How about at the intermediate school, in the best of all possible worlds, the CHR had sufficient capacity? Do you think that would be a positive to have CHR working at the intermediate school as well?
They are, yes. They are there now.
Oh, they are there.
Intermediate is 5th through 8th grade. So those are.
Oh,
the
so
two
I'm
schools
referring
that
to
are in.
middle school, but the intermediate school is actually.
The M is Killingley Memorial School.
Oh, Memorial School.
Yep,
Correct.
and that's
right.
the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders.
Right, that's, yeah, my mistake, I apologize. Okay, so they're at the intermediate school, so how about Killingley Memorial School?
Yeah,
Would that be helpful to have CHR there?
yes, I think so. I mean, I really think that, is that? Should I talk?
Yeah, go on.
I think that it is very, it's good at all levels, but from my perspective, I wanted to make sure that we were doing it well in the spaces that we opened in before expanding it, and make sure that we had the process down, you know, and that everybody bought into the process at the school level.
Okay, and I do only have a couple more questions. I just want to follow up on some questions you were asked. You testified that CHR has been I think, quote, a wonderful partner, close quote. So would it be fair to say that they work well with the mental health professionals that are on the front line, so to speak? In other words, the social workers and the school counselors?
Yes, but it's new this year.
Sure.
So it's a learning curve for people who are not always used to having that easy communication and collaboration with an outside provider. So I think there's been some growing pains that we've addressed along the way in order to open up the lines of communication between the school mental health providers and administration. So like the intakes was one area. I think another area was in like if a student was suspended or going for expulsion, making sure that that was communicated to me or the counselor so that they could then communicate it to CHR, because instead it's like a couple weeks where this kid hasn't shown up for the appointment and no one is really sure, that no one knows yet that they're not in school for that reason. But so like we've identified things along the way kind of, and then once we see it, like you don't know what you don't know until you start doing it. So, and every place I've worked before, it's already been well established before I got there. So, so kind of getting everybody on the same page as far as what they are, what they do provide, what they don't provide, because at one point, like counselors had asked if CHR could go out and do home visits. And it's like, that's what we do in the school. Like there's school staff who does that, right? So it was all just a learning curve for the school mental health workers, for the teachers, for administration.
I think that's helpful. But as you testified before, at least as of November of 2023, the barriers to refinement were still at 8 out of 10, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I have nothing further. Thank you so much.
Any follow-up questions? Yes, you may.
The microphone. Ms. Cody, you mentioned that that you were really happy with CHR, and I think you were saying you wouldn't be happy having to use two different agencies at the same time, if you could avoid it.
when we first started looking at bringing a group on, it was really just for the high school at first. But then, when I was talking with CHR, we said, wait, could you come to different schools? So they said yes. And then we had this other agency that was local and the board really liked them too. So that's when I was like, hey, maybe they could, once they explained why that doesn't work as well, I understand that. I just hadn't thought of it before.
And you mentioned a couple of times the learning curve.
Mhm.
And I gather that each of these agencies has its own processes and forms to fill out. and
Yes.
Things of that nature.
Yes, like, for example, like this is a very, very thorough, the generations proposal, like, is incredibly thorough. CHR's is appropriately thorough. That's the one I had been working with. I hadn't seen this one until after I was already working with CHR. So, but CHR's, in my opinion, was appropriately thorough. It just was different.
Is it going to be harder for parents and students to have to acclimate to a different program because of the learning curve, as you've talked about, if you're required to bring in two different agencies? Or
I think so, because right now it's just, they just talk to a school counselor or they can call the triage number. So like all of the schools have that information for how to reach out to CHR directly. So I think it would be, but especially from a staffing perspective, because I know CHR has staff.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you very much.
Any more questions for Ms. Cody?
Nothing from the state, thank you.
Ms. Cody, on behalf of the panel, we so appreciate that you have spent this time with us today. We have been looking forward to this testimony. It was very valuable to us to have. So thank you for taking the time and appearing. You may step down.
Thank you.
Attorney McKeon, do we have another witness today or?
State does not. In fact, based upon Ms. Cody's testimony, the state may just rely solely on Ms. Cody's testimony. There's a possibility that we could call someone else for a very brief testimony, but I'm not certain that that's necessary, and I don't want to tie up the panel's time unnecessarily. So I'd like to reflect upon that and let the panel know. But at this point, I'm inclined just to state that is the state's sole witness.
Okay, we do have a date set aside for another hearing, which is April 16th. So we will have that remain in place until we hear differently from the parties involved. Because it has been so difficult to get dates in. So we do already have it set aside for April 16th, so that will remain.
Well, at this point, Killingly is not rested on their case. I don't know whether Killingly is. Certain citizens do have witnesses to call, but I would like to know whether Killingly has witnesses to call.
And that's why our next hearing date will be April 16th, and unless we hear differently, we will proceed with April 16th.
Our intention is to talk among ourselves, the three parties, and in line with that, I just want to state that I truly appreciate, the state appreciates Attorney Noonan. I know he stepped into the breach late into the process. He's been, a good advocate for his client, but at the same time, it's been very constructive working with him. So I want to thank him for that.
We agree. We're glad to hear that. Most important. Motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.